What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weisz.
Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Jess Galica of ReclaimYourCareer.co. And Jess, I always like to mention other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Since you are an inspiring woman leader, who are some other people I've had on that are inspiring women leaders? I had Marcia Daywood. She helps head up the Angel Capital Association. Really cool interview there. Cheryl Conti is the chair and founder of a digital marketing agency, Do Big Things, and she's doing stuff in the kind of in the investor world as well. And Andrea Houston, she's founder of R2's Design, and for over 25 years, they've been creating visual communications for Fortune 500 companies, Microsoft, Starbucks, Expedia, and many more. Check out more episodes at InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And Jess, how do we do it? We help you run your podcast. You know, for me, Jess, and we know each other a little bit now, the number one thing in my life is relationships. And I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. I have found no better way to do that than over the past decade to profile the people and the companies and the leaders that I respect and admire and share it with the world. Let other people hear about what they are working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com. You can email us, support@rise25.com. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. All right. Today, I'm excited. We have Jess Galica. She is a successful corporate leader with a career spanning almost every kind of corporate work environment, including management consulting at Begen. She's worked at top companies like Apple, Siemens, and a variety of startups. And you know, Jess, this is probably pretty common, I imagine. After becoming a new mom, Jess pivoted and she started researching and writing about women and career when she noticed she was surrounded by women, you know, herself included, who were building stellar careers, doing everything right, but waking up feeling lost, right? So Jess is a corporate speaker, private coach to high-performing women, and upcoming author. And if you're watching this, it's probably already out. Reclaim Your Career, published by Fast Company Press. You can check her out at ReclaimYourCareer.co. Jess, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
So tell people a little bit about what you do at Reclaim Your Career.
Yeah, so at Reclaim Your Career, we do a few things. The first is private coaching with high-performing women who are in corporate roles, who, as you described in the intro, are thinking about how to level up their career or change and reinvent in new ways, and have decided that they want to really invest and turbocharge their career path and get support doing it. So we offer traditional career coaching and also strategic advisory, where we can get hands-on and really support women to excel and thrive in those roles. And in addition to working with women one-on-one, I also do corporate speaking at companies and universities, mostly addressing women's groups and female students. And of course, the book, right? So there is general writing, research, and thought leadership that I do around this topic of women, career paths, and equity at work. So the book is coming out soon. And I also am launching an upcoming podcast. So let's
give a shout out to the podcast.
Yeah. So the Reclaim Your Career podcast, which will be launching over the next month.
Check it out. By the time you hear this, it's probably already out. So
absolutely.
Also, I want to give a shout out to the reason we met was Henry Middleman, right?
That's right. Yep. So Henry works with a lot of great leaders, and we've worked together. So was happy to get connected through him.
You know, one thing that sticks out on this topic, and we were chatting a little bit before we hit record, is guilt. Okay. There's a lot of guilt. You know, my wife is a business owner too, and I feel like there's mom guilt. There's also sort of degrees of guilt. So I'd love for you to talk about guilt. And this is also talked about in your book.
Yeah, you know, I was sort of surprised that guilt was such a big part of so many women's stories when they were thinking about making changes or reinventing their career. And I think that guilt comes up for a couple of reasons. The first is that I work with primarily high performing women who have been really successful in their careers. And so when you've reached a certain level of success, both in terms of income and prestige, and especially if you've reached that success coming from, a different place in your background, right? If you've sort of gone from here to here, anytime you're questioning where you're at, there's this sense of guilt, both financial guilt of, well, how could I leave a job that has this stable income when I know I'm really lucky to have this kind of stability? There's that kind of comparative or socioeconomic guilt, right? That you might be saying, gosh, my parents would have, killed to have a job like this. How can I possibly complain about the work that I'm doing? And so women really struggle, I think, with giving themselves permission to want something more or to want something different, even if, every fiber in their being is shouting that, this isn't it when it comes to their career. And then certainly if you add on the layer of motherhood, which, for many women in mid and late career, they've made the choice to become mothers. I think that just amplifies the guilt even more. I think moms, especially in the US, are conditioned to always be thinking about others and taking care of others and sacrificing for others. So the idea of finally investing in yourself, putting yourself front and center, and making decisions without compromise, that can be a really uncomfortable space for working women and working moms who haven't been conditioned to operate in that way.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And I think when you talk about it, and people hear about it, it's I imagine somewhat therapeutic for people because they realize they're not alone. And I don't know, use the word normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole beginning of this work for me was really my own personal story of feeling exactly like what I described and you described. And I remember thinking, what's wrong with me, right? Am I broken when it comes to my career? Why can't I just find a job that really clicks? And when I started thinking about researching and digging into this topic more, I just put out a casual ask to people in my network. Hey, do you know any women who are thinking about some of these same things or feeling these same emotions that I am? And I was inundated with people to talk to. It felt like every single woman had a story that was very similar to mine. And that, of course, made me more interested in the topic because I thought, well, there's something really big here and a lot of women would benefit from this. But second, yeah, it was a little bit therapeutic, like you're describing, to think, if so many women who I look at and admire, who I believe are smart and talented and hardworking, if they are also feeling this way and having these challenges, this is not a problem about me. This is a problem about broader systems, broader policies, broader ways of working and expectations that we have for women. And there's probably good reason that this is not working for so many women who are in corporate America. So I agree with you. It's a pervasive, I don't even want to say the word problem, because it's not a women's problem, but it's a pervasive experience among women, and usually has less to do with the individual woman and more to do with the systems and supports around her.
Yeah. Jess, when you started this journey of the book, you had this notion that you would be discovering certain things, but what you actually discovered was a lot of the emotional components. So talk about when you first started, what you thought you were going to get out of the discovery process of the book, and then what ended up happening.
Yeah. So when I started, I was focused on my career and my problem, so to speak, right? I was thinking, I think maybe I'll make a career change for myself. And so I went into these conversations thinking, well, I'll talk to a few women and they'll give me, the 3 tips or tricks to do to figure this problem out and solve it, right? I'll come up with my little checklist, and I'm generally a pretty type A person, so I love a good checklist. And I thought I'll really find these tactical, pragmatic things that if I do X, Y, and Z, it will lead me to, this perfect path. And what I was really surprised by is that when women shared their stories of making changes or reinventing their career or getting really strategic about their career trajectories, it had absolutely nothing to do with the tactical or the pragmatic. The conversations, when I let them be open and natural, were all about the emotional parts of those decisions. So things like guilt, right? The guilt that held them back for so long, or things like fear around failure. And also, women were talking about, once they did make these change, they were talking about the benefits in very emotional terms, right? This sense of deeper engagement in their work, a sense of relief and joy that they'd finally found something that felt purposeful and meaningful. And so I was really surprised, and it made me think that, okay, I went in thinking I'd come up with this tactical checklist, but really, I think women are incredible at checking off checklists. They are incredible at executing. I think where women need more support is around the emotional things that go into navigating your career and making big decisions.
We were saying how career changes are universal and almost the new norm. What did you mean by that?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we used to think of careers as, the ladder, climbing a ladder, right? Was the classic analogy. It sort of feels like a dinosaur at this point. The career economy has just evolved so much that the notion of your career being like a ladder, very stable, predictable, linear, is, not true for virtually anyone. There's lots of new analogies that have emerged, but my favorite one is that I think careers are like a river. And they're like a river in the sense that there's going to be twists and turns. Your career also is going to be influenced and impacted by the environment around you. The course of rivers actually can change, and you'll never know everything that's around the corner. And there's probably going to be some rocks and some currents and some things along the way, right? And so I think that the old view was that women climb the ladder, they hopefully punch through the glass ceiling and keep climbing. But today it's just a much windier adventure. And I think that requires that women have new tools, new strategies, new intention and investment when they're navigating their careers, because it's more complicated today. And of course, in a global pandemic, it's only become more complicated.
I love that analogy because with the river, and one of the most important things I've done in my life, whether it's health or business or whatever, is sought out and had a mentor and coach, right? And so when you are navigating a river, my cousin is actually a river rafting guide, or was, in Tennessee. You need a guide, and you could have class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, class 5 rapids. And if you, and even in the same, area, there's you can go this route and it's a class 2, or you can go this route and it's a class 5. And basically there's a 90% chance of falling out of the boat. And he would ask, hey, do you guys want to take a swim? Because if we go here, there's probably a 90% chance we're going to take a swim. I'm like, no, I don't want to take a swim. I don't want to get in the cold water and be down. So he's like, okay, we'll go this way. We'll navigate this way. Right. And if I were in the boat alone, I would just go wherever it take me. So I would love to hear, what do you see your role as that guide and that coach for women?
Yeah, I think the power of coaching, I feel so strongly about, and it's for 2 reasons. The first is that I think that women don't always look at their careers from an investment point of view. And so I say to women, your career is likely the biggest financial asset of your life, full stop. When you think about the income, right, that you're generating over your lifetime. And so when you think about a financial asset, it's kind of intuitive for people that you're going to feed that asset, you're going to invest in it, you're going to try to really maximize the return that you'll get on that financial asset. And I want women to start having that mindset when it comes to their career. This is something that you want to get support on, you want to invest in, and you are going to see that real return when you fuel this biggest financial asset of your life, your career. So I love that mindset for women, shifting to my career as something to grow and invest in unapologetically. And then the value of coaching itself beyond, that actual true financial return, I believe, is pretty simple. It's having a thought partner to guide you through careers, which we just talked about are complex, right? I mean, you're falling out of a boat was the analogy. And it's also accountability. So the power of working with a coach and having a time every week or every other week where you're showing up to think about your career, to solve problems that you're facing in your office, or to think about where you want to go next. That alone, that time slot on your calendar alone is unbelievably impactful. And I can't tell you the number of people who say they come to one coaching session, right? And they say, oh my gosh, that was so productive. I talked about things that I haven't thought about in 15 years, or, I already am seeing these new insights and connecting the dots. So it's really amazing what having a thought partner in your corner and having accountability can do for your sense of confidence in your career, your sense of ease in your career, and also that acceleration of your career to reach new opportunities and new financial rewards as well.
And Jess, there's some really good advice that you give, which we'll get to in a second. But what are the type of people who are ideal people to work with you?
Yeah, so I work, primarily with women who are in corporate roles, and they're, high performing women who are at kind of mid, late stage career, right? So they've been in their career typically for over a decade. And usually they're coming with one of two things. One is they're looking to redirect. So they're looking to reinvent their career in some way, whether that's changing an industry, reinventing is something totally different, or starting their own business. I see frequently. So they're kind of they're at this pivot point, right? And they know that they need to proceed with a lot of thought and a lot of support, because this is a really big decision, especially for women who are established in their careers. When you're thinking about making a change, you don't want to do it lightly. This really is a critical time to invest and do it right. And then the second type of woman who I work with is more around kind of turbocharging where she is. So given that I have a consulting and a strategy background, I think that's unique from a coaching perspective, because I'm able to get a little more hands-on and tactical with clients than a typical coach. So there are some women who just need more of an executive coaching support, right? They're having to communicate to their C-level executive team, put really impactful presentations together. They need to think strategically about how they're communicating, how they're pitching investment and business ideas within their organization. So I also support women in that way who, almost like having, how the biggest companies in the world hire Begen as their consultants. It's like, the best female leaders in corporate America hiring me as their individual personal consultant.
And we'll get to your advice, but talking about Begen and Apple and some of the companies you've worked with, I'd love to hear a lesson that you learned, whether it's with Begen, Apple, or another company, large company.
Ooh, a lesson. I mean, I've learned so many lessons throughout my career. Let me think where to take that. Or did you have something in mind, a type of lesson?
No, just what stuck out. I mean, like a lot of people, we learn from, like you said, working with a lot of high level companies through Begen. So I don't know if there was maybe a lesson learned from a certain leader there, or just from some of the work that you were doing at the company.
Yeah. So I think at the corporate level, right, when I'm thinking about what I've learned in terms of a company, I think the biggest thing for me is focus, right? So when you think about corporate strategy, I think if I had to define strategy in one way, it's focus. It's what are the choices you're making for what you're focusing on, and therefore, what are you not focusing on? And so I see that a lot, right, in other companies, or even with women who are starting their own small businesses. There's often enthusiasm and excitement to do so many things. It's great to have that energy, but in order to have success and to actually execute on it, I think focus and discipline around what you are doing, but what you are also not doing is very, very important. And I think sometimes for women that can be challenging, because women are not always great at saying no, right? We've often been conditioned to be sort of pleasers, and we want to say yes to everything. But the power of focus and the power of knowing what you're not doing is probably the most important lesson I think I take away from my experience working in companies and also with clients during my consulting.
Is there anything that you noticed just as an observer of how either Begen or Apple ran their company as an observation to how you'll maybe run or take it into your business?
Yes, I think that one fantastic thing that I'll take away from Begen is how people invested Begen is as an organization. Now, Begen is unique in that its product is its people, right? It is sending consultants out to the biggest companies and highest paying clients in the world. And it's the people are the product, right? That is the intellectual capital. And so it makes a lot of sense that Bain is such an employee and people-oriented company. But I will always extrapolate that into any industry. I think a lot of companies underinvest in developing, retaining, growing their talent. And at the end of the day, I think even if you have the most fantastic product, it is people who are running your business. And so that's a lesson definitely that Bain taught me, and one that regardless of industry, I would recommend and bring with me.
What did Bain do? What did you see them do? Do they have different training programs? Did they assign people coaches within the organization? What did they do to help develop people?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think that two things come to mind is that there is a very structured program around expectations for employees and also feedback. So there's very little ambiguity around what you should be doing to be successful in your role. I actually found Bain to be way more entrepreneurial than I expected. So it's not that people are cogs in the wheel, right? You have a lot of freedom and creativity and sort of entrepreneurial spirit to, do the work in your own way. But there's this overarching structure of what is expected of you really at every stage in your career. And then there's a very consistent and deep feedback mechanism to make sure that you know how you're tracking and how you're progressing along that. So I think that's probably the one that stands out the most. And then there certainly are more career development programs. And I know that, Bain is integrating that even more so that employees at all stages of the organization, not just when they're thinking about moving on, but at all stages have the support of a career or executive coach.
That's a really interesting topic, feedback mechanism. That's, probably people don't even realize when they have you as a coach, that is also a version of a feedback mechanism. I'd love to learn a little bit more about when you think of that with Bain or whatever company, what does that look like? Because I know that some of the organizations I talk to, they don't have this set feedback mechanism like you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think that there's the two parts to it, right? There's the expectation setting. And so that's kind of, very traditional talent development, right? Coming up with the skills that are required at different positions. And then in terms of the feedback, I think that there's probably two components that make Bain unique or sort of best in class, I would say. And one is that you are getting feedback consistently and from a lot of people. So the way that a consulting firm is structured, you're working on client projects that might last 2 or 3 months. They could be longer, but you're working with a lot of different team members and a lot of different managers throughout your time at the company. And you are always getting feedback from whoever you're working with. That's, bottom up when you're managing. And that's, of course, top down from whoever is managing you. And I think one of the benefits of the nature of consulting is that, you're not relying on feedback from the same people over and over again, where it might get stale or you might see the same notes. So there might even be bias in that feedback, right? I mean, we've all had a boss who is tough or terrible, and you think, well, I don't care what they're saying, right? But the nature of consulting is that you get a lot of reps of feedback and different points of view. And I think what you find then is that the noise that you get in feedback starts to quiet down because you have enough, you have a big enough N, right? You've got enough samples to start to really understand, okay, interesting. I really can see the commonalities, the threads here. And that's very cool because it becomes a way that very explicitly reflects to you what your strengths are that others are noticing and what your weaknesses are. So I think it's that consistency and that diversity of feedback that you get that makes it a very interesting model.
You mentioned feedback, and this kind of goes into, we are chatting before we hit record about advice. And there's a common thread of advice that you give, which is, you know more than you think.
Yeah. I get this scenario a lot with women who come and say, where I'm at in my career, I know, deep down, I know that it's not it, right? I'm not there. There's something else, but I have no idea what that something else is. And the feedback that I give to women is that you know more than you think. And I think that can be frustrating for a lot of women at first because they say, well, no, I don't. I just told you, right? And, it's not necessarily an easy thing to solve. But what really happens is that when women can finally sit down, can finally reflect, often with the support of a coach, they're able to break down some of the narratives that they've built over their career about what they want and what success looks like, all these things that have come externally. And they're able to start to tease out some of these internal truths, these things that they've always known. I mean, literally, they know things, right? Like they notice things about themselves since they were, 4 years old or 5 years old, right? I always loved to read and write, for example. But all my life, I thought, well, I could never be a writer, right? Who ends up being a writer? And you start to return to these truths that you've always known, but you've learned to just suppress or deprioritize relative to the other external things. I worked with a client recently who's a former competitive athlete, and same kind of thing, she didn't have certainty about where she wanted to go next. And, I challenged her with, I think you know more than you think. And what you find is that when you take some time to reflect and answer tough questions from a coach, right, you start to connect the dots in ways that maybe you formerly didn't. And so all of a sudden, for the first time in her kind of adult career, this woman was connecting the dots between her former competitive athlete kind of childhood, really, where she was in an environment where every single decision was made for her, training programs.
Very structured.
Extremely structured, right? Training programs, extremely intense, like what you're eating, what you're doing every day. And she finally was starting to see that, oh, wow, that has an impact on how now as an adult, decades later, I view my decision-making abilities in my career and why maybe I don't see the confidence or my capability in making sound decisions, and why I continually look to others to make these decisions for me, when really, I'm only going to get to the best decision when I make it for myself.
A lot of times, just this decision can feel, maybe there's a preconceived notion that it's going to be this huge dramatic event. All right. So what do you tell people? It seems scary. It seems like it's going to be this dramatic thing.
Yeah, I think this idea of a career change or pointing your career in a new direction being this dramatic thing, it's a big shift, but it's not this dramatic leap that you go into work on a Friday, you quit your job, and on Monday you're a new person, right? It just doesn't work that way. But I think it's, we've got these fun sort of Hollywood stories that look like that, or you hear these outliers that are these very interesting, things that get written up. But the reality is that among, the dozens of women who I interviewed in depth for my book, and the, even more than 100 more who I studied from afar, in the vast majority of cases, these career transitions are slow, honestly. They're extremely thoughtful. They're extremely well planned out. They're extremely disciplined, and they're usually executed over years in most cases, right? The full kind of transition. And so on the one hand, that might feel scary to women in a different way. Like, oh my gosh, I can't just clap my hands and have everything fixed overnight. But I actually think that acknowledging this long-term reality of most career shifts is comforting for most women, because most people are not people that can, make spontaneous, over the weekend decisions to totally transform their lives. There are people who want to take these baby steps and want to be able to test things out. So that's definitely the more common reality. It's also the more strategic and probably smart way to do it in most cases. And I think acknowledging that actually invites and opens up the possibility for more women to make a change and go after this thing that they want, because it's not so much in their panic zone. It's now, a little stretch here and there to get them where they want to go.
Jess, what does a small test look like if someone's like, oh, I'm just going to inch towards this major life-changing goal, potentially? What does a small test look like? What would be an example?
The small, testing and learning, iterating is so important. I advocate for it with every client I work with. It looks different depending on what you're trying to figure out, right? But, I'll have some people that are thinking about starting their own business, right? They say, well, I'm in, corporate marketing. I'm thinking about launching my own consulting firm, working with a number of brands. And, I urge people to do that. Like, one, talk to people who have done it to really understand what goes into it. But then the second is there any way that you can test this out, right? Can you do this as a side hustle? Can you, I don't know, can you help a friend who's launching her small business to do some marketing work for fun for 5 hours? How does it feel to you? Is it engaging and energetic? Or are you finding that, oh, wow, there's also all this administrative stuff that I didn't think about that is now creating this huge headache for me? So, any way that you can, side hustle, test it out, even if it's in like an unofficial way, is hugely valuable. So that's just an example for a small business owner, but you can extrapolate that to any other industry, the ability to really test it. And I think see if you're getting the energy out of it that you expected, or if you're encountering headaches that you hadn't anticipated, is a really helpful signal to follow.
Yeah, I love that. I think you help take through that process, whereas like there's a discovery process, then there's almost like a research process, and then there's a testing process, and then it just iterates from there. Jess, I have one last question. Before I ask it, I want to just point people towards your website to learn more, and your podcast and your book, and it can all be found at ReclaimYourCareer.co. Are there any other places online we should point people towards, or is that the best place?
Yeah, the website has all of the resources and can get you to check out my coaching, check out my speaking, and you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Jess, Begen, Galica. Love to connect and share content on LinkedIn weekly as well.
Last question, Jess. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and who are some of the women leaders you respect and admire and have learned from, whether it's, personally or afar?
Oh, there are so many right now. I feel like there are, women are having a moment right now. And I think there are incredible thought leaders who are adding such important messages to the conversation. So gosh, it's hard to pick one. I'm gonna name drop a few. I think the first one is Eve Rodsky. I love her work. She's the author of Fair Play and the author of Unicorn Space, all about women finding and all people finding more equity when it comes to labor inside the home and pursuing more creative interests too. Also, Reshma Sajani, who's the author of Pay Up, who is really challenging corporate America to change its systems, its processes, its expectations, its entire way of being in order to allow women to succeed and thrive and create equity in the workplace. And then the third and my last would be Rachel Rogers, who's the author of We Should All Be Millionaires. And really, it's a book for women and people of color. And I love how she is unapologetic about the fact that women should be going after more financial security and more wealth in their life. So those are three of my faves: Eve Rodsky, Reshma Sajani, and Rachel Rogers.
Jess, I'm going to be the first one to thank you. Thank you. Check out ReclaimYourCareer.co. Check out Inspired Insider. Check out Rise 25. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like $100 grand.